This is Chris Ruddy, and I love Gene Valentino's GrassRoots TruthCast. Make sure you're tuning in just like I do every day, every week, every minute.
I'm excited to announce that we're having our first ever mega sale on overstock clearance and brand new products. For example, save over 50% on this season's flannel sheets. Queen size only $59.98. Kings only $69.98. They sell out fast every year, so order now. Save 20% on our brand new My Crosses. They're designed in the likeness of the one I've worn every day for over 20 years. They come in men's and women's, and they're made right here in the USA. Get our 2025 six-piece My Towel sets for only $29.98. Our initial quantities are extremely low, so get them now before they go. And our best-selling standard My Pillows, just $14.98. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use this promo code to take advantage of our first ever mega sale. But wait, remember that $75 free shipping rule? Well, that ship is sailed because right now, every order ships absolutely free.
The American Airlines jet that collided with that Army Blackhawk helicopter last night feared dead, along with the 3 soldiers on the Blackhawk. This is the worst U.S. aviation disaster in almost a quarter century. The helicopter apparently flew into the path of the jet as it was approaching for landing at Ronald Reagan National. The FAA and NTSB are probing the cause of the crash. At least 28 bodies have been pulled from the cold waters of the Potomac River so far. For a deeper understanding of what happened last night over the Potomac and how future tragedies like this might be prevented in the future, let's welcome in aviation expert, former commander of Escambia County Search and Rescue, and host of GrassRoots TruthCast podcast, Gene Valentino. Gene, welcome to the Leventhal Report.
Thank you, Rick. Glad to be with you.
What are your initial thoughts on the crash?
Well, my initial thoughts were traumatic and devastating, and condolences to all those who've lost loved ones. But if you put it in perspective, it is much less than what we've seen on our highway system and other transportation systems. But nonetheless, it's a tragedy. I've been a pilot for 50 years, and being savvy and aware of the risks and perils, especially around high hazard areas, meaning military bases and or congested systems like DCA, Reagan International Airport, is nonetheless requires the full attention and careful transit through those areas. So I don't make light of it. 98% of the time, I regret to say, as a pilot, I'll be first to admit it, it's usually pilot error, and full stop right there. The pilot is ultimately in control and should be aware of his surroundings. Control tower personnel issues aside for the second, it is an issue, Rick.
Yeah, and to that end, we have a clip of communications between air traffic control and the helicopter moments before the crash. I want to play that for you now.
Okay.
S25, CRJ in flight. S25, F1 is CRJ.
This club has a aircraft in sight, press separation.
Confirm seeing the jet. So what went wrong?
Well, the black box, as you call them, which are really orange, when recovered from both aircraft, will tell us the whole story, and there's no room for speculation. So the data still needs to come in. But I suspect, if you're asking me my opinion, I suspect that the helicopter pilots with the night vision goggles, if they were wearing them, had only a 50-degree span in view. They're trained well to pivot and rotate to make sure they see the circumstances around them, referred to as situational awareness. And I'm concerned about what the situational awareness was of the helicopter pilots, notwithstanding the fact that, as you mentioned earlier, there was a go-around, a missed approach that had to happen just the other day for the encroachment of another helicopter too close to the final approach. When that pilot gets authority from the control tower that he has approval to land, he has the full right of way and access to his approach for his landing. And this was controlled airspace. And when you're in controlled airspace, all other aircraft had better be on the same frequency and know firsthand that they must yield to that pilot on his final approach. Flaps down, landing gear.
You're referring to that Washington Post report that 24 hours earlier, another plane had to avert landing at Reagan National because of another helicopter that was very close to its path. So a very similar set of circumstances apparently happened 24 hours earlier, and then it happened again last night with much more fatal results.
And it happened to me three months ago.
Wow.
I had to go around because of
airspace.
Yeah, well, that's correct. I had to go around myself because of an aircraft coming out on the runway after I had been given approval to land. You best all be on the same frequency to know that someone's been just given approval to land. Now, I admit I do not know the specific facts in this situation yet, but it's true that you must have a full awareness and a standby procedure in place. God forbid someone else is not paying attention.
Well, what you're describing and what happened last night sounds more to me like an air traffic control issue than anything else. But I understand you don't want to go there yet because we don't have all the facts. The new Department of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was at that Trump news conference, and he shed some light on the Blackhawk's training mission. Listen to this.
It was an annual proficiency training flight. And when we look at the crew, and not all can have been notified, so we're going to withhold ranks and names at this point. We do know on our side who was involved. It was a fairly experienced crew, and that was doing a required annual night evaluation. They did have night vision goggles.
How surprising is it to have Blackhawk pilots involved in a crash like this? I mean, I know you mentioned those goggles as well, but aren't they typically well-trained and experienced in wearing the goggles and flying at night?
In many cases, they have more training than me. I honor them for the regiment they go through. But you are on specific altitude issues. There is a specific pathway. Remember, the American Eagle aircraft had filed his IFR flight plan straight into that runway, even though he was on a visual approach. So the record will show in his management system that's on the recorder exactly what the altitude and speed, as I said before, his flaps down, gear down, and making his final approach to the runway. A very vulnerable situation for a pilot. He's at a slower speed, so there's sometimes less flexibility in the aircraft, especially if there's crosswinds or fluctuating winds. And it's very important that everyone yields to that aircraft on his final approach. But if the military aircraft in the area, I understand have, and I've been part of that pathway, on a VFR pathway below the glide slope or above the glide slope, then they're in good stead. But in this case, Rick, if they're interfering with or not paying attention to what that elevation should be, then they're putting themselves at risk in a very congested area. The worst of the worst is right there at DCA. Admittedly, it is very congested.
And you mentioned at the top how this is rare compared to automobile accidents. People die every day on our highways. It's in far greater numbers than ever perish in plane crashes. And maybe it's a miracle, but maybe it's just because there are far fewer airplanes flying than there are cars on the road, and they're much further apart from each other. They're not on top of each other like we are every single day when we're driving on our highways and byways.
Yeah, well, the FAA has instituted some good disciplines recently. In the last few years, we have a new procedure that you'll see in many private aircraft and commercial. It's called ADS-B. It stands for the Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast System. It allows, the tower normally has the radar, which is what everyone feeds into, and the traffic controller is looking at, which is what you were referring to before. But the ADS-B system in the aircraft for private passenger aircraft and commercial aircraft is a system that allows the aircraft between each of them to see each other, whether there's a control tower or not. And that has been a new technology that has been introduced that I don't know the military Blackhawks were using or had at their disposal in this incident. Again, the flight recorder will certainly show that. But if they did have that in the Blackhawk, he or she flying that aircraft, that helicopter, would have been more attuned to what the relative proximity was of this commercial American Eagle flight. And that would be independent
Gene,
of whether the...
Sorry to cut you off. You mentioned the restricted airspace over Washington, and I wonder, because there's so much of it, would that have affected this because the planes and helicopters are all being forced into a much tighter flight zone than they would be if it was all open airspace?
Well, if it's all open airspace, it's not Class B Bravo or Class C Charlie. It's usually Class D for Delta, which means you have a more open area to travel and there's less requirements in terms of who you have to radio and talk to land. In this case, because the congestion is so tight, there are specific disciplines that a licensed pilot follows to get through that space. I'm down in the panhandle of Florida, and I'm going through Pensacola, NAS Pensacola, Eglin, Tyndall Air Force, Hurlburt, and I'm being handed off. I'm doing what's called flight following, and you talk to the approach control frequency even before you get to the tight areas, and you let them know who you are, where you are, and where you're going, and they see you on their radar, and they're following you through the pattern. The question is, did the Blackhawk helicopter do that with the same control tower and approach personnel? If they did, then back to your first point, which you led off in the broadcast, the tower or the approach control personnel would have known more readily where that Blackhawk helicopter was relative to the American Eagle flight. But they should have known, the Blackhawk helicopter should have known his proximity to that American Eagle flight, and that's what needs to be clarified.
Understood. Gene, I've been to most of those bases and to the Panhandle multiple times. Beautiful area. And
come on down, we'll go flying.
Appreciate your expertise on this subject. I would love that. Gene Valentino, thanks very much for joining the show.
Throughout history, the spirit of patriotism has prevailed. The battles may have changed, but the values remain the same. Today, in 2024, we find ourselves at a pivotal moment where the call for unity, freedom, and a better future echoes louder than ever. For more than 10 years, Patriot Mobile has been committed to supporting the values that make our nation great. With affordable plans and reliable nationwide coverage, Patriot Mobile is not just a wireless service. It's a call to action for those who believe in the American dream. Because this year is not just any year, it's the most important year since our nation's founding. Choose a wireless carrier that shares your values. Choose Patriot Mobile.